April 28, 1945, 14:47 hours, northern France. The mud was the color of old blood. Elena Schmidt noticed it first as she stepped down from the canvas-covered truck into the processing yard at Camp Lucky Strike. Around her, 42 other women in stained Wehrmacht auxiliary uniforms descended into the same mire, their boots sinking into earth that grabbed and held like it had been waiting for them. The smell hit before anything else. Coffee. Real coffee. Not the burnt grain substitute they'd choked down for years, but actual coffee, rich and dark, wafting from somewhere beyond the processing tents. Mixed with it came diesel fuel, wet canvas, and something else. Something clean. Soap. Actual soap. Elena was 24 years old, 5 feet 7 inches tall, 92 pounds, body mass index 14.4. She had been a radio operator in the Signals Corps. She spoke 3 languages. She had decoded 743 messages in 2 years of service. She had believed every word the Reich told her about what would happen if the Americans captured her. Now she stood in French mud, feeling something warm running down her inner thigh. She looked down. Her grey uniform dress was darkening at the hem. Not mud, not water, blood, fresh and red and spreading. The pain had been building for 6 days. A piece of shrapnel from the Allied bombing raid that had struck their convoy on April 22nd. Just a small piece of metal. She'd pulled it out herself, pressed cloth against the wound, kept moving. Complaining was weakness. Weakness invited death. But the infection had set in 3 days ago. The wound had reopened during transport. And now, standing in the processing yard of an American prisoner of war camp, watching blood seep through her dress at a rate of approximately 2 inches per minute, Elena Schmidt realized she was going to die here. Better this way, she thought. Better to bleed out in the mud than face what the Americans would do. The propaganda had been explicit. During training at the Signals School in Munich, the instructors had shown them photographs. American soldiers looting churches. American soldiers standing over German bodies. The radio broadcasts from Berlin had been even clearer. If the Bolsheviks capture you, they will rape you and kill you. If the Americans capture you, they will do the same. They simply hide it better. Death is preferable to capture. Elena's legs folded. She collapsed forward, her body hitting the mud with a wet, heavy sound that silenced every voice in the yard. For one frozen moment, nothing moved. Then the screaming began. Greta Hoffmann was 19 years old, 5 feet 4 inches, 87 pounds. She had been conscripted 18 months ago, pulled from her mother's kitchen in Hamburg, where she'd been learning to make proper strudel. They'd sent her to a typing school, 60 words per minute. File reports, answer telephones, count ammunition crates, type casualty lists until her fingers went numb. Now she dropped to her knees beside Eleanor's body, her hands hovering over her friend's back, uncertain, terrified. "Eleanor," she whispered, then louder, "Eleanor!" The blood was spreading faster now, pooling in the mud beneath Eleanor's body. Around them, the other women scattered. Some ran backward, certain this was the beginning, the massacre they had been promised, the violence that would now descend upon them all. Katrine Bauer, 28 years old, radio operator, still wearing her party pin hidden in her pocket, grabbed 2 younger women and pulled them away from Eleanor's body. Her face twisted with fury and terror. "Sie haben sie erschossen," someone screamed. "They've shot her," but no shots had been fired. What happened next defied every truth the Reich had planted in their minds. 2 American medics sprinted across the muddy yard, their boots throwing up clouds of earth. They wore white armbands marked with red crosses. Their faces showed no rage, no cruelty, only urgent professional concern. Behind them came a stretcher carried by 2 more soldiers, and running faster than all of them, a medical officer, Captain Thomas Aldrich, 42 years old, West Point class of 1925, 156 combat surgeries performed since landing at Normandy. "Make a hole!" His voice cut through the chaos. "Everyone back! Move!" The German women parted, some still weeping, others frozen in disbelief. Greta remained crouched over Elena's body, shielding her friend with her own small frame, tears streaming down her mud-splattered face. Aldrich dropped to his knees in the mud. He pressed 2 fingers to Elena's throat. His uniform would be ruined. He didn't care. Pulse weak, thready, respiratory rate elevated. He looked up at Greta. His German was terrible, accented and broken, but the meaning was clear. "Fräulein, we need to help her." Greta stared at him, an American officer, kneeling in mud, touching a German woman, not with violence, with care. It made no sense. "We help," Aldrich said slowly, carefully. He pointed to the red cross on his armband. "Understand, we help her." One of the medics, Corporal Patrick Donnelly, 26 years old, Boston Irish, Harvard Medical School dropout, who'd enlisted in 1942, already had scissors in his hand. He cut away the fabric of Elena's dress with practiced efficiency, exposing the source of the hemorrhage. A wound in her lower abdomen, 4 centimeters by 6 centimeters, infected. The tissue around it was angry red, streaked with darker lines radiating outward. The pus that drained from it was yellow-green. Pseudomonas. Dangerous. Donnelly had seen this before. Too many times. In Normandy, in the Ardennes, in 100 muddy fields across France and Belgium. "Temp's going to be high," he said. "This has been cooking for days." Aldrich was already reaching for his medical bag. "Start an IV. Morphine 10 milligrams. Plasma 500 cubic centimeters. Penicillin 100,000 units." "Yes, sir." The movements were automatic, professional. The same movements Aldrich had performed 156 times before. Enemy and ally, American and German, British and Italian. In his operating room, in the field hospital 3 miles from this camp, there was only one truth that mattered. You're a patient, I'm a doctor. Everything else was noise. Within 3 minutes, Eleanor was on a stretcher being carried toward an ambulance that had roared into the yard. The back doors stood open, revealing a clean interior, real medical equipment, oxygen tanks, supplies arranged on metal shelves, bandages, instruments, everything organized according to Field Manual 850, medical service in theaters of operations. Not the makeshift aid stations the German women had seen during the war, where wounded soldiers lay on straw, with barely enough bandages to go around. This was different. This was real medicine. As the ambulance doors closed and the vehicle pulled away, siren wailing, one of the older women spoke. Margot Werner, 34 years old, field nurse, 11 years of experience. She had seen 847 men die. She had held boys as they bled out, whispering lies about how their wounds weren't fatal. She knew exactly what war looked like. And this, what she had just witnessed, looked like something else entirely. "They're saving her," she said quietly. But in the silence that had fallen over the group, everyone heard. "The Americans are saving her." It was not a question. It was a statement of fact that seemed to violate the fundamental laws of the universe as they understood it. And it was only the beginning. 10 days earlier, April 18th, 1945, a farmyard outside Reims, France. The German forces were collapsing. Everyone knew it, even if no one dared say it aloud. Berlin was surrounded. The Führer had retreated to his bunker. American and Soviet forces were closing from both sides like a vice. Elena's unit, a signals company attached to a Wehrmacht garrison, had been retreating eastward when American armored columns cut them off. The male soldiers surrendered immediately. The officers fled. 43 women were left standing in a farmyard with their hands up, terrified. An American lieutenant walked through their ranks, young, sunburned, shouting something in English that none of them understood. Eventually, a German-speaking sergeant translated, "You're prisoners of war. You'll be processed and transported to a holding facility. Follow orders and you won't be harmed." You won't be harmed. The words meant nothing. They had been told what capture meant. During training, the instructors had been explicit. If you are captured by the Bolsheviks, they will rape you and kill you. If you are captured by the Americans, they will do the same. They simply hide it better. The Americans are hypocrites. They speak of civilization while committing atrocities. Better to die fighting than surrender. But they hadn't fought. They had stood in a farmyard with their hands up, while American soldiers zip-tied their wrists and loaded them onto trucks. The propaganda had filled every corner of their world. Newsreels showing American soldiers looting churches, radio broadcasts describing torture camps where prisoners were starved and beaten. One particularly vivid poster, plastered across barracks walls, showed a brutish American GI towering over a terrified German woman. The caption read, "This is what surrender looks like." So when the trucks came to transport them westward, the women prepared for death. The journey took 8 days. 270 kilometers in covered military trucks. 43 women packed together on wooden benches. The Americans gave them water twice daily, 2 liters per person, measured, distributed by soldiers who didn't look at them with hatred or lust, just the blank professional courtesy of men doing a job. They received hard biscuits that tasted like sawdust, but were more food than some had seen in weeks. They stopped at night in guarded compounds. No one touched them. No one threatened them. This only deepened their fear. The cruelty would come later, they told themselves. The Americans were waiting until they reached the main camp. Then the real horror would begin. During the journey, they whispered in the darkness. Katrin Bauer, whose husband had died at Kursk, insisted they should resist. "If they try to dishonor us, we fight. We die with dignity." She still believed every word the Führer had spoken. Germany was righteous. The enemy was evil. Defeat was temporary. The wonder weapons would come. Victory was still possible.
Greta Hoffmann wasn't sure what to believe anymore.
She had operated telephone switchboards in Frankfurt, connecting calls between officers who spoke of wonder weapons that never came and victories that turned into retreats. She had heard things she wasn't supposed to hear. The gap between official truth and reality had grown too wide to ignore. Margot Werner said little. She had seen too much death to waste energy on speculation. Whatever came next would come. Rage wouldn't stop it. Faith wouldn't prevent it. She simply sat with her hands folded, watching the younger women wrestle with their fear. Elena Schmidt had served for 2 years. She had believed in something once, the Reich, the cause, the promise of a greater Germany. But 2 years of decoding messages had taught her things the propaganda couldn't hide. She had read casualty reports, supply shortages, retreat orders disguised as tactical repositioning. The Reich was dying. She knew it. But saying it aloud would be treason. So she sat in silence, feeling the infected wound in her abdomen pulse with each heartbeat, and waited to see what the Americans would do. On April 28th, the trucks pulled into Camp Lucky Strike. The name was American humor, dark and practical. Lucky Strike, like the cigarettes, like luck, like striking gold, or striking out. The camp had been built to house thousands of American troops waiting for ships home. Now it held displaced persons, refugees, and prisoners of war. 43 German women were a footnote in a much larger operation. But someone had prepared for them. As they descended from the trucks into the mud, Elena noticed the signs, printed in both German and English: registration, medical examination, supplies. Someone had taken the time to translate. That small detail registered in her mind, trained to notice everything. Someone had planned for this. Someone had thought about the logistics of processing German female prisoners of war and had made sure the signage would be comprehensible. That was when the pain in her abdomen spiked, sharp, sudden, like something tearing. That was when she felt the warm blood running down her thigh. That was when the world tilted and the mud rose up to meet her. And that was when Captain Thomas Aldridge ran across a muddy yard to save the life of a woman whose country had killed 23 of his medical school classmates. The remaining 42 women stood in the processing yard, watching the ambulance disappear. The siren faded into the distance. The mud squelched under their boots. The smell of coffee hung in the air, impossible and mocking. A sergeant approached them, American, young, maybe 25. He gestured toward the tents. "This way, please." The translation came from Corporal Hans Bergmann, German-American. His parents had emigrated in 1923. He'd grown up speaking German at home and English everywhere else. Now he served as a translator, a bridge between two worlds that had been trying to kill each other for 6 years. "You'll be processed now," Bergman said in German. "Registration first, then medical examination, then you'll be assigned quarters." The women moved like cattle, slow, uncertain, waiting for the trap to spring. The registration tent smelled like canvas and ink. A woman sat behind a folding table with a typewriter. She wore a Red Cross armband. Her name tag read Helen Kensington. She was 52 years old, from Vermont. Her son David had died in Tunisia in 1943. He'd been 23 years old, shot through the throat during the opening minutes of an assault on a German position. She looked at the German women with tired eyes that held no hatred, just exhaustion and the determination to do her job correctly. Through Bergman, she asked questions: name, age, unit, assignment, where were you captured? The questions were simple, clinical, not accusatory. Greta went first because she was standing closest. Her voice shook as she gave her answers. Greta Hoffmann, 19 years old, typist, signals support, captured near Reims. Kensington typed without looking up. Her fingers were quick on the keys, efficient, professional. When Greta finished, Kensington glanced up briefly and nodded. Not a smile, not hostility, just acknowledgement. Next. One by one, they answered the same questions. The process took an hour. No one was struck. No one was insulted. It was simply paperwork. Boring, methodical, and strangely normal. When it was finished, they were led to another section of the camp. Medical examination, Bergman translated. This was where the nightmare would begin, they thought. This was where the Americans would reveal their true nature. They walked past rows of tents. American soldiers moved between them, carrying supplies, talking, smoking cigarettes. Some glanced at the German women. Most didn't. They were just another group of prisoners in a camp that processed thousands. The medical tent was larger than the registration tent. Inside, it was divided into sections by canvas partitions. The smell of disinfectant was strong, clean, antiseptic. And standing near the entrance waiting for them were 4 women in American military uniforms. Not men, women. Medical personnel, nurses, doctors. The lead officer was Lieutenant Sarah Pemberton, 36 years old, Johns Hopkins Medical School, class of 1931, pediatrician. She had volunteered in 1942, served in North Africa, Italy, and now France. She had treated thousands of children. And now she stood in a medical tent in northern France, responsible for the health assessment of 42 enemy prisoners. She spoke through Bergman, her voice firm but not harsh. "We will examine each of you for injuries and illness. This is required by the Geneva Convention. You will be treated with respect. If you are injured, you will receive medical care. If you are sick, you will receive medicine. Geneva Convention." The words sounded like fantasy, like something from another world, a world where rules still mattered, where law still meant something. Pemberton continued, "You will undress behind privacy curtains, one at a time. You will be given a robe. The examination will be conducted by female medical personnel only." Privacy curtains. Greta stared at the white sheets hanging from metal frames. Privacy. The concept was almost alien. For 2 years, she had lived in crowded barracks, where privacy didn't exist. She had changed clothes in rooms packed with 50 other women. She had used latrines with no doors. Privacy was a luxury from a previous life, from before the war, from before the world went mad. Now an American doctor was offering it to a German prisoner. Pemberton gestured. "First, please." Greta was motioned forward. A nurse led her to a section divided by white sheets. The nurse handed her a cotton robe and then, impossibly, turned her back. Gave her privacy. Greta stood frozen, holding the robe, unable to process what was happening. The nurse waited, patient, not rushing, not watching. Slowly, Greta removed her filthy uniform. The fabric stuck to her skin where sweat and dirt had bonded it to flesh. Underneath, her body was a map of deprivation. Ribs visible, hip bones jutting, skin pale and stretched. She had been eating 600 to 800 calories per day for 8 weeks. Before that, maybe 1,200. The rations had been cut and cut and cut again as the Reich's supply lines collapsed. Bread, thin soup, sometimes potatoes, rarely meat. She put on the robe. It was clean. It smelled like soap. "Fertig," she whispered. "Ready." The nurse turned around and smiled gently. Not pity, just kindness. The examination was thorough but gentle.
Pemberton checked her eyes, ears, throat, listened to her heart and lungs with a stethoscope, asked questions through Bergman about pain, injuries, illness. When she found lice in Greta's hair, inevitable after weeks without proper washing, she didn't recoil in disgust. She simply made a note on a chart. "Delousing treatment will be provided after your shower," Bergman translated. "Standard procedure for all incoming personnel. You'll also receive clean clothing." Standard procedure. As if Greta were not an enemy, just another person who needed medical care. The others went through the same process. Some emerged from the examinations with bandages on wounds they had been hiding. Others received medications for infections. Margot, with her nurse's training, watched the American procedures with professional attention. She recognized the protocols: proper hygiene, organized record-keeping, genuine medical care. This wasn't theater. This was real medicine. When it was Margot's turn, the examining nurse was Lieutenant Pemberton herself. She worked quickly and competently. At the end, she did something unexpected. She placed a hand on Margot's shoulder and spoke. Bergman translated. "You're going to be fine. All of you. We'll take care of you." Margot's throat tightened. She managed a stiff nod. Pemberton smiled briefly before moving to the next patient. After medical checks came the part they had dreaded most. They were led to another building, wooden, long. Steam rose from vents in the roof, a shower facility. This was it, they thought. This was where the humiliation would happen. Mass showers, no privacy, guards watching, degradation disguised as hygiene. But inside, they found 12 individual stalls, each separated by canvas curtains. Hooks on the walls held thick white towels. On wooden benches sat stacks of clean clothing, simple cotton shirts, trousers, underwear, socks, and soap. Real soap. Bars of white soap that smelled faintly of lavender, stacked beside each clothing pile like small miracles. Procter & Gamble. Ivory. 99.44% pure. Manufactured in Cincinnati. Shipped across the Atlantic. Delivered by the Red Ball Express Logistics Network. Distributed to prisoner of war camps as part of supply contract AW437B. Someone had planned this. Someone had calculated how much soap would be needed to maintain hygiene standards for prisoners of war. Someone had signed contracts, arranged shipping, ensured delivery. The machinery of a functional state, operating according to regulations, following laws, even for enemies. Greta picked up one of the bars and turned it over in her hands. She hadn't seen real soap in over a year. The Reich had been using substitute soap made from clay and chemicals that stripped skin raw. This was smooth, gentle. It smelled like something from before the war. A Red Cross volunteer demonstrated the showers through Bergman. Hot water was available. They could take as much time as they needed. No one would rush them. No one would watch. Greta entered a stall first. She pulled the curtain closed and stood in the small private space, trembling. Then she turned the knob. Hot water poured over her. She gasped, then began to cry. She couldn't help it. The water was perfect, hot and clean and endless. It ran over her shoulders, down her back, washing away weeks of accumulated filth and fear. She picked up the soap and worked it between her hands. The scent of lavender filled the small space. For the first time in months, she felt almost human. Around her, in other stalls, similar moments unfolded. Women wept under the spray. Others laughed in disbelief. Catherine stood under the water in silence, her face unreadable, her ideology cracking under the simple weight of hot water and soap. When they emerged, clean, dressed in fresh clothes, hair wet and smelling of shampoo, they barely recognized each other. Margot stood before a small mirror mounted on the wall.
She had expected to see a broken woman. Instead, she saw someone who looked merely tired, someone who might recover. The soap sat in her hand, a small white rectangle, 3.5 ounces. It had somehow become a symbol of something larger: mercy, humanity, the possibility that everything they had been taught was wrong. That evening, they were led to dinner. The mess hall was large, plain, functional. Through the open doors, they could hear voices, American soldiers talking, laughing, the clatter of trays and silverware. The smell that rolled out was overwhelming. Meat, cooking meat, real meat. Greta stopped walking. Her stomach contracted so violently she had to press her hand against it. She hadn't smelled roasting meat in over a year.
In Germany, meat rations had dropped to 250 grams per week in 1944. By early 1945, there was often no meat at all, just watery soup, black bread, potatoes when they were lucky. "Keep moving," a guard said. Not harsh, just directive. They entered the mess hall. It was enormous. Rows of long tables filled with American soldiers eating and talking. Some glanced at the German women, most didn't. There was no special segregation, no area marked for prisoners. They were simply directed to a serving line where food was being distributed. Greta went first, holding her metal tray with both hands. A server stood behind the counter, Mess Sergeant Robert Blackwell, 38 years old, from Georgia. He had been cooking for the army since 1940. He looked at Greta with the same blank professionalism he looked at everyone else. She was just another person who needed to be fed. He placed food on her tray without comment. Rice, white rice, 8 ounces, fluffy and steaming. Not the brown, broken grains mixed with sawdust they had eaten during the war. This was actual white rice, California grown, shipped across the Pacific to the East Coast, then across the Atlantic to France, delivered by the Red Ball Express. 6,000 trucks, 23,000 personnel, 12,500 tons per day. Vegetables, green beans and carrots, 4 ounces each. Actually colored, actually recognizable, Del Monte, canned, but real vegetables nonetheless. Meat, a thick slice of something that looked like pork roast with gravy, 6 ounces, from an Iowa farm, frozen, transported in refrigerated trucks, cooked that afternoon. Bread, white bread, 2 slices, soft and fresh, still warm, baked that morning in the camp bakery. Butter, 1 ounce, Wisconsin dairy, real butter, not margarine, not substitute, actual butter. Milk, 8 ounces, whole milk, white, cold, supplied by a local French dairy under contract to the US Army. And an orange. Greta stared at the orange as if it were a hallucination. The Lencia, from Florida, shipped via Liberty ship, delivered to Camp Lucky Strike as part of the fresh fruit allocation for May. Fresh fruit had disappeared from Germany in 1943. Oranges were luxuries she remembered from childhood. Christmas treats, special occasions, the smell of citrus peeling, the burst of juice, the impossible sweetness. Now an American mess sergeant had just placed one on her tray like it was nothing. She moved to a table in a daze. The other women followed, each receiving the same impossible portions. They sat together at the end of a long table, staring at their trays. No one ate. Catherine spoke first, her voice low and bitter. "It's a trick. They're showing us abundance to break our spirits, or it's poisoned." But even as she said it, her eyes were locked on the meat. Margot picked up her fork. As a nurse, she had learned to be practical. Starving herself to prove a point was idiocy. She cut a small piece of meat and placed it in her mouth. She chewed slowly, her eyes closed. It was real, properly cooked, properly seasoned, real meat, not the mystery tins of preserved fat they had choked down at field hospitals, not horse meat, not worse. This was pork, tender and rich, and her body responded to it with an intensity that shocked her. A single tear rolled down her cheek. That was all the permission the others needed. They began to eat. Slowly at first, then faster, as their bodies remembered what real food meant. Some cried while eating, others ate in focused silence. Greta ate 3 bites of rice before she had to stop, her shrunken stomach unable to handle more. She sat breathing heavily, staring at the half-full tray, overwhelmed. The bread was the hardest thing to accept. She held the slice in both hands, feeling its softness. In Berlin, bread rations had been cut to 7,500 grams per week in 1945. And that was black bread, dense, often moldy. This was white bread, soft, fresh, the kind of bread that hadn't existed in Germany since before the war. She took a bite and nearly sobbed at the taste. Across the table, another woman whispered in German, "How can they have so much? We were told America was collapsing, that their economy was broken, that they were desperate and weak." She gestured at her tray, at the half-eaten meal that was more food than she had seen in weeks. "This isn't weakness, this is power." The observation settled over the table like a weight. It was true. Everything they had been told about America, that it was decadent, failing, on the verge of collapse, it was being dismantled with every bite. The propaganda had promised them that Germany's discipline and sacrifice would overcome American softness. But Germany was starving in ruins, while America had so much food it could feed enemy prisoners like this. The orange became a symbol. Greta held hers in both hands, unable to peel it. The color alone was almost painful to look at. Bright, vivid orange in a world that had been grey for so long. She brought it to her nose and inhaled. The citrus scent exploded in her senses, sharp, clean, alive. Finally, she peeled it. Juice ran over her fingers. She separated one segment and placed it in her mouth. The sweetness was almost unbearable. After years of bland food, the intensity of flavor was shocking. Juice ran down her chin. She didn't care. She ate slowly, making each segment last, while tears streamed down her face. An American soldier at a nearby table noticed. Private Jack Holloway, 20 years old, from a farm in Kansas. He had grown up picking oranges from trees his grandfather had planted. He had taken them for granted his whole life. He caught Greta's eye and gave a small, awkward nod. Not mocking, not cruel, just acknowledgement. One human being seeing another. She looked away, ashamed of her tears, ashamed of her hunger, ashamed that the enemy had given her an orange and she had devoured it with gratitude. That night, back in their assigned barracks, the 42 women lay in real beds with real mattresses and blankets. Each woman had her own bunk. Privacy curtains could be hung for those who wanted them. Katrin spoke into the darkness, her voice hard. "They're trying to make us forget. They feed us so we'll feel grateful, so we'll betray everything we believed." No one answered immediately. Then Margot's voice came, quiet but clear. "Or perhaps they're just following their own rules. The Geneva Convention requires proper food for prisoners. Maybe this isn't strategy. Maybe this is simply what they do. Even for enemies, especially for enemies. That's what separates civilization from barbarism." The words hung in the dark barracks. Outside, the camp was quiet except for distant voices and the sound of trucks moving supplies. 42 German women lay in clean beds, their stomachs fuller than they had been in months, their minds wrestling with a truth that refused to fit into the framework they had carried across France. The enemy had shown them mercy, and that mercy was harder to bear than cruelty would have been, because cruelty they understood. Cruelty confirmed what they had been taught. Cruelty made the world make sense. But mercy required them to see their captors as human. And once you saw the enemy as human, everything became complicated. Greta lay in her bunk, staring at the ceiling. Her stomach was full, her skin was clean, she smelled like lavender soap, and somewhere in a hospital 3 miles away, Elena Schmidt was alive because an American doctor had chosen to save her. The first 2 days passed in a fog. Day 1, medical observation, rest. The women slept 14 hours, their bodies collapsing into the first safe sleep they'd had in months. Some woke screaming from nightmares, others woke confused, uncertain where they were. Nurses checked on them throughout the night. No threats, no violence, just professional care. Day 2, orientation. A Red Cross worker named Margaret Flynn explained camp rules through Corporal Bergman. Schedules, expectations,
Rights. The word rights sounded strange in German, Rechte, as if prisoners had such things. Flynn was patient, kind. She explained that they would be assigned work, that they would be paid, that they could send letters home, that they could purchase items at the canteen. The women listened in numb silence, still waiting for the other shoe to drop. It never did. By day 3, a routine emerged. The schedule appeared on the barracks wall at 600 hours, printed, bilingual, German on the left, English on the right. Wake at 600, breakfast at 700, work assignment at 800, lunch at 1200, work continues at 1300, end of work day at 1700, dinner at 1800, lights out at 2100. Greta stood in front of it, reading the words 3 times.
Someone had translated this. Someone had thought about the logistics of communicating with German prisoners and had ensured the information would be accessible. Work assignments were distributed after breakfast. The Americans needed labor. The camp was enormous. Kitchens required staff. Laundry facilities needed workers. The infirmary could use assistants. Margot was sent to the medical building. Lieutenant Pemberton had reviewed her file, seen 11 years of nursing experience, and made the obvious choice. A skilled nurse was a skilled nurse, regardless of the flag she'd served under. Greta was assigned to the kitchens, dishwashing, food preparation, simple tasks that required no language skills. Catherine refused her assignment. She sat in the barracks, arms crossed, face set in stone. "I will not work for the enemy," she said. The American sergeant who'd come to collect her simply shrugged and left. No punishment, no threats, just a note on a clipboard. The work itself was mundane. Greta stood at a large steel sink, washing dishes in hot, soapy water. Around her, other prisoners worked alongside American soldiers. There was no segregation in the kitchen. Everyone did their job. The rhythm was steady, industrial. The clatter of plates, the hiss of water, the smell of cooking food. Sergeant Blackwell supervised, moving between stations, checking quality, maintaining standards. He treated everyone the same, brusque, professional, fair. At noon they broke for lunch, the same abundance as the night before. Greta's stomach was adjusting. She managed to eat more, her body beginning to remember what adequate nutrition felt like. And then, on day 5, something happened that shattered the last remnants of their understanding. They were paid. Each woman received an envelope. Inside, camp scrip. Paper money that could only be spent within the camp. $2.40 per week. Greta stared at the bills in her hand, as if they might vanish. This made no sense. They were prisoners, enemies. Why would the Americans pay them for labor? Corporal Bergman explained through the standard briefing he'd given 100 times before. Geneva Convention, Article 62. Prisoners of war shall be paid for their work. The rate is based on local civilian wages adjusted for camp conditions. This is not optional. This is law. Law. As if law still meant something, as if rules applied even to enemies. He continued. The scrip can be used at the camp canteen. You can purchase personal items, writing materials, small luxuries. There's an audit every week by Swiss Red Cross inspectors. Camp commanders who fail to comply face court-martial. Court-martial. Personal accountability. An officer could be prosecuted for not paying enemy prisoners. The system was staggering. Someone had written these regulations. Someone had created the enforcement mechanisms. Someone had established procedures to ensure that, even in war, certain standards would be maintained. The canteen was a small building near the center of camp. Inside, shelves held items for purchase: cigarettes, soap, writing paper, stamps, chocolate, toothpaste, combs, small mirrors, magazines. 47 items available. Greta counted them twice. Prices were posted. Chocolate, 15 cents. Soap, 10 cents. Stationery, 5 cents. Cigarettes, 25 cents per pack. The inventory represented another logistics chain. Suppliers, contracts, distribution networks, all functioning according to plan. Greta spent 50 cents. 1 Hershey bar, 1 pad of writing paper, 1 stamp. She held the chocolate in her hand that evening, sitting on her bunk. The wrapper was brown and silver. The letters were bold. Hershey's. Milk chocolate. She opened it slowly. The smell hit first. Sweet, rich, cocoa and sugar and milk. She broke off one square and placed it on her tongue. Let it melt. The taste was overwhelming. Sweetness she hadn't experienced in years. The chocolate dissolved slowly, coating her mouth, and for a moment she was transported back to Christmas 1938, her father bringing home a bar of chocolate, her mother breaking it into pieces, distributing it carefully among the family. The warmth of the kitchen, the smell of strudel baking, the world at peace. That world was gone, burned away in 6 years of war, but the taste of chocolate remained the same. She ate 3 more squares before wrapping the rest carefully and placing it in her footlocker. Rationing, making it last, old habits. The writing paper sat on her bunk. She stared at it for 20 minutes before picking up the pencil provided by the camp. She wrote carefully, Liebste Mutti. I am alive. I am in France in an American camp. I am being treated according to international law. Please do not worry. I hope you are safe. I do not know when I will return, but I am well. Your daughter, Greta.
She didn't mention the soap, the hot showers, the chocolate, the orange. Those truths were too complicated for a censored letter. How could she explain that she was living better as a prisoner than her mother likely was as a free woman in the ruins of Germany? The letter would be reviewed, approved or rejected. If approved, it would be mailed. The machinery of communication still functioning even across enemy lines. Day 14. The ambulance returned. Greta was in the kitchen when she heard the vehicle pull into the yard. She dried her hands and walked to the window. Through the glass, she saw the back doors open. Elena stepped out. Greta ran. She didn't think, she simply moved. Out of the kitchen, across the yard, her feet slipping in the mud. 41 other women converged from different directions, all moving toward the same point. Elena stood by the ambulance, looking around, slightly dazed. She was different, color in her cheeks, weight returning.
The bandage on her abdomen was clean, white, professionally applied. They surrounded her, touching her arms, her shoulders, confirming she was real, not a ghost, not a dream. Elena Schmidt, 24 years old, who had collapsed bleeding in the mud 14 days ago, was alive. Greta couldn't speak. She just held onto Elena's hand and cried. That evening in the barracks, Elena sat on her bunk and told them everything. She described waking in a hospital room, clean, white walls, a bed with actual sheets, sunlight through a window, an American nurse sitting beside her, not guarding, just present. Nurse Patricia, young, maybe 25. She had smiled when Elena's eyes opened, a real smile, not cruel, not mocking, just relief that her patient was awake. The doctor had come shortly after, Captain Aldrich, the same man who had knelt in the mud. He had explained through a translator what they had done. Surgery on April 29th at 3:20 hours, duration 2 hours and 47 minutes. They had debrided the wound, removed infected tissue, established drainage, administered penicillin, 200,000 units every 4 hours for 10 days. The infection had been severe, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, dangerous. Left untreated, it would have killed her within 3 to 5 days. But it wasn't left untreated. They had also given her blood, 2 units of O negative, donated by American soldiers who had volunteered to give blood for the war effort. Their blood, in her veins, keeping her alive. Elena paused in her telling. Her voice grew quiet. I asked why, she said, through the translator. Why waste American blood on a German enemy? The barracks had gone silent, everyone listening. Captain Aldrich looked at me for a long time before answering. Then he said, Geneva Convention Article 12. Wounded prisoners receive the same medical treatment as our own forces. But also, you're a patient. I'm a doctor. In my operating room, that's all that matters. Elena touched the bandage on her abdomen. Those words broke something in me, some wall I'd been holding in place. I cried. while he stood there uncomfortable but patient. She told them about the recovery, 7 days in the hospital, Nurse Patricia checking on her every few hours, bringing soup, fruit, crackers, building her strength slowly, the wound healing properly, no complications. They had asked her permission before every procedure, every medication, every examination, as if she had rights, as if her consent mattered. On day 12, the sutures had been removed. The wound was healing cleanly. Another week of observation, then she could return to the main camp. She had returned on day 14. Now she sat in the barracks, surrounded by women who had spent 2 weeks wrestling with the same questions she had. "I wanted to die," Elena said quietly. "I believed death was better than American capture. I thought they would torture me, violate me, kill me slowly. But they saved my life. They used their medicine, their resources, their blood on an enemy. I still don't fully understand why, but I know what it means. Everything we were taught was a lie." The days became weeks. Margot worked in the infirmary, assisting Lieutenant Pemberton. She learned new techniques, saw how American military medicine functioned, the supplies, the organization, the standards of care maintained even under field conditions. One afternoon, Pemberton asked her to assist with a surgery, an American soldier, appendicitis. Margot scrubbed in, stood beside Pemberton, handed instruments, watched the procedure. Afterward, Pemberton said simply, "You're a good nurse, thank you." As if nationality didn't matter, as if they were simply medical professionals doing their job. Greta continued in the kitchens. She learned some English, basic words, plate, clean, more, thank you. Sergeant Blackwell was patient with her halting attempts. One day, he showed her how to make biscuits, American style, flour, butter, milk, baking powder. He demonstrated the technique, let her try. Corrected her gently when she added too much liquid. The biscuits came out passable. Blackwell tasted one and nodded. "Good. You learn quick." It was a small moment, insignificant in the grand scheme of war, but it represented something larger. An American sergeant teaching a German prisoner to bake, building something across the divide. Katrin remained in the barracks for the first week, refusing to work, refusing to participate, clinging to her resistance as the last thread of loyalty. But on day 8, she emerged, walked to the assignment office, asked for work. They sent her to the laundry. She spent her days washing linens, American uniforms, prison uniforms, sheets, towels. The work was hard, physical, honest. She said nothing about her change of heart, but the pin remained hidden in her pocket. Not worn, not thrown away, just carried. A symbol of something she was still processing. Week 4. The letters came twice a week, delivered by the Red Cross, censored, but real. Greta's mother had written back. The letter was short, the handwriting shaky. "My dearest Greta, I received your letter and cried for joy all day. Hamburg is destroyed. We live in the basement of what used to be the Schneider building. There are 9 of us. We have bread twice a week if we are lucky. Your grandmother is sick. There is no medicine, but we survive. We live. That is enough. Be strong, my daughter. Come home when you can. With all my love, Mutti." Greta read it 3 times, then looked at that evening's dinner. Roast chicken, 6 ounces. Mashed potatoes with gravy, 4 ounces. Peas, 2 ounces. Apple pie, 1 slice. Coffee, 8 ounces. Her family was eating bread twice a week. She was eating roast chicken. The guilt was crushing. Anna, 30 years old, mother of 2, read a letter from her husband. "The children ask about you every day. I tell them you are safe. I do not tell them we have no food. I do not tell them your mother died last month. I do not tell them I am thinking of sending them to the countryside where there might be more to eat. They are so thin, Anna, so thin. I love you. Come home. France." Anna couldn't eat that night. She sat in the mess hall staring at her full plate, while tears ran down her face. Margot found her later, sitting outside the barracks in the cold. "Your children need you alive," Margot said gently, "strong, not destroyed by grief. You survive, you get strong, you go home, you help them rebuild. That's what they need." How can I eat when they're starving? Because that's what parents do. You survive so you can return to them. Anna cried then, long and hard. Margot sat beside her, saying nothing, just present. Week 5. A Swiss Red Cross inspector arrived for the weekly audit, standard procedure. He reviewed the wage records, canteen inventory, medical logs, housing conditions, food quality. His name was Henrik Müller, thin, precise. He had been conducting these inspections since 1943. Camp Lucky Strike was the 47th facility he'd audited. The inspection took 4 hours. Müller examined everything, checked documentation, interviewed American staff. Then he did something unexpected. He asked to speak with the prisoners, privately, without American personnel present. The 43 women gathered in the mess hall after dinner. Müller stood before them, speaking German. I am required to ask, have you been mistreated? Coerced? Denied any rights under the Geneva Convention? Your answers are confidential. I report directly to the International Committee of the Red Cross in Geneva. Silence. The women looked at each other. This was their chance. If there had been violations, if there had been abuses, this was the moment to report them. Then Katrine stood, the woman who had resisted longest, who had clung to her ideology until it crumbled, who still carried her party pin in her pocket like a talisman of a dead faith. No, she said clearly. We have been treated according to law. Better than according to law. We have been treated as humans. Müller made notes. Any complaints? Anything you need that you have not received? Greta spoke. Her voice was small but steady. Only one. We do not understand why. Müller looked up. Why what? Why follow these rules for enemies? Why waste resources on people who fought against you? Why treat us with dignity when we expected to be treated with contempt? The inspector was quiet for a long moment. He set down his pen. When he spoke, his voice carried the weight of someone who had seen the worst humanity could offer. Because the rules are not for when it's easy, they are for when it's hard. Anyone can be civilized in peace. The test is whether you remain civilized in war. That is the only test that matters. The Americans are passing that test, here, in this camp. The question is whether your country would have done the same, and whether the Germany you rebuild will choose civilization or choose what came before. He paused. Remember this. Remember that law can hold even in the darkest times, and remember that the choice to follow law, even when it's hard, is the only thing that separates us from barbarism. He picked up his clipboard. If there are no complaints, I will file my report. This camp is in full compliance with all Geneva Convention standards. The women sat in silence as Müller left. What he had said was not comfort. It was a challenge, a question thrown at their feet. Would you have done the same? And the terrible answer, the one none of them wanted to acknowledge, was probably not. That night, the women talked late into the darkness. The inspector was right, Eleanor said. The question isn't whether the Americans are following rules. They are. We've seen it. The question is what we do with that knowledge. Katrin pulled the party pin from her pocket, held it in her palm, the small metal badge she'd worn with pride for 6 years, the symbol of everything she'd believed, everything she'd sacrificed for. I've been carrying this, she said. I couldn't throw it away, couldn't wear it, just carried it. I hated all of you for accepting this, for eating their food, for working for them. I thought you were weak, traitors. But I was the weak one, too weak to question, too afraid to see truth, too proud to admit I'd been wrong. When I go home, I'll never wear this again. I'll teach my nieces that mercy is stronger than hate, that kindness is braver than cruelty, that the Americans showed us something we should have shown ourselves. She stood, walked to the small stove in the corner of the barracks, opened the door, and threw the pin into the fire. It glowed for a moment, then melted. The eagle, the swastika, the symbol that had defined their world, gone. Katrin returned to her bunk, sat down heavily. No one spoke. Then, quietly, Greta began to clap. Slow, steady. Others joined. Not celebration, just acknowledgement. Of courage, of change, of the terrible difficulty of letting go.
Greta discovered the library on week 4. It was a small room in one of the administrative buildings. Shelves lined the walls, holding books in several languages. Martha Sinclair was the librarian, 56 years old, grey hair pulled back in a neat bun, soft eyes that held deep sadness. Through Bergman, Sinclair explained the rules. Books could be borrowed, returned when finished. No limit on how many. The library was open every afternoon. Greta asked, "Why would you help us? We were your enemy." Sinclair's expression softened. "My son died in North Africa in 1943. His name was William. He was 22 years old. He was killed fighting against German forces. Hating you won't bring him back. But maybe teaching you to read English, maybe helping you learn, maybe that builds something better. Maybe that's what William would have wanted. A world where his death meant something other than just more death." She touched Greta's shoulder. "You're very young. 19, yes? You have a whole life ahead of you. Use it well. Build something better than what came before." The 42 women gathered that evening. Elena spoke first. "We've been here 5 weeks. In that time we've seen something impossible. A system that functions, rules that hold, enemies treated as humans. When we go home, people will ask. They'll want to know what captivity was like. What do we tell them?" "We tell the truth," Margot said firmly. "All of it. The propaganda, the fear, the reality. Germany needs truth now, not more lies. This is what civilization looks like. Rules that hold even under pressure. Law that applies even to enemies. Mercy that costs something but is given anyway. That's what we tell them." Hands began to rise. Who chooses to face the truth together? Who chooses to build something new from the ruins of everything we believed? 1 hand, 5 hands, 10 hands, 20, 40 hands rose, then 41. Catherine was last, but her hand rose steady and sure. December 12th, 1945. The announcement came during morning formation. Colonel Richard Thornton stood on a platform, 55 years old, West Point class of 1914. Through Bergman. "Repatriation will begin in January. Ships have been allocated. You will be transported to Germany beginning January 15th. You should prepare for departure." The words should have brought joy. Home, family, return. Instead, they brought dread. 3 days later, Elena requested a meeting with Colonel Thornton. She brought Margot and Greta with her. Elena spoke in English. She had been practicing for weeks. Her accent was thick, her grammar imperfect, but the meaning was clear. "Colonel, I want to thank you. When I collapsed in the mud, I believed I was dying. I believed Americans would let me die. Or kill me. I was wrong. You saved my life. Captain Aldrich, Corporal Donnelly, Nurse Patricia. You gave me medicine, surgery, care. You treated me like a human being when I expected to be treated like an animal. You changed how I see the world. That is a gift I will carry for the rest of my life." Thornton was quiet. Finally, he spoke. "Miss Schmidt, we did what the Geneva Convention requires, what any civilized nation should do. The Convention represents a promise that even in the worst circumstances, even when we are enemies, we will maintain certain standards. We will see each other as human. War is terrible. It brings out the worst in us. But it doesn't have to destroy our humanity. We can choose to maintain it, even when it's hard, especially when it's hard." Greta spoke for the first time, her English halting but determined. "Colonel, if we had won, would we have done the same?" Thornton considered it carefully. "That's a question you'll have to answer for yourselves. I can't answer it for you. But maybe asking that question is the first step. Maybe that's where rebuilding begins, with honest questions about who you were and who you choose to become. You're going home to a broken country. It will be hard, harder than anything you've experienced here. But you have something most people don't. You've seen an alternative, a system that works, laws that hold, mercy that's possible even between enemies. Build something better. That's all any of us can do now." The final days in camp passed quickly. Martha Sinclair gave Greta a parting gift, the German-English dictionary she'd been using. Inside the cover, Sinclair had written in careful script, "For your future. Build bridges. The world needs them. Martha Sinclair, December 1945. Lieutenant Pemberton found Margot in the infirmary on her last shift. She handed her a medical textbook, Gray's Anatomy, heavy, detailed, expensive. "You're a good nurse," Pemberton said. "Germany will need good nurses. Use this knowledge to heal your country, build hospitals that work, train nurses who care, make something better." Corporal Walter Kowalski found Greta outside the barracks. He was holding a small package wrapped in brown paper. "For you," he said in his terrible German, "for the journey home." Inside were 4 Hershey bars and a note. "Stay safe, build something good. The world needs it. Walter." January 15th, 1946, 6:30 hours. The trucks came at dawn. They boarded carrying small bundles, books, photographs, letters, the physical evidence of transformation. At the port of Le Havre, the ship waited. USS General Blatchford, 4-person cabins, real bunks, running water. Even in departure, the standards remained. The ship pulled away from France on January 16th at 1400 hours. 43 women stood on deck, watching the coastline recede. "The propaganda said Americans were savages," Elena said quietly, "that they would torture us, violate us, kill us. But savages don't ask permission before surgery. Savages don't pay wages to prisoners. Savages don't give dictionaries and chocolate and say, 'Build something better.'" On the night before they reached Germany, the 43 women gathered. Margot stood. "We survived something impossible. We survived not just the war, but the collision of everything we believed with reality. We can't pretend it didn't happen. We can't go back to who we were before. Germany will be different too, devastated, defeated, occupied, but also rebuilding. Maybe we can be part of that. Maybe what we learned here about law, about rights, about mercy, maybe those lessons are what Germany needs now." January 23rd, 1946, 7:15 hours, Hamburg. The ship docked in heavy fog. What they saw was incomprehensible. 80% of the city destroyed, 900,000 people homeless, mountains of brick and twisted metal, buildings reduced to foundations, and people, thin, grey, moving like ghosts through the ruins. Greta walked through streets she didn't recognize. 3 hours of walking, through destruction that seemed to go on forever. She found her mother in what had once been the basement of the Schneider building. 9 people lived in that space, Frau Hoffmann among them, 47 years old, 82 pounds, hair completely white. When she saw Greta, she didn't speak, just stared, then moved, grabbed her daughter, held on. They stood in the ruins, holding each other, both crying too hard to speak. Greta reached into her bag, pulled out the things she'd saved for this moment. Soap, 3 bars of ivory, the chocolate Kowalski had given her, a small tin of coffee. "The Americans gave them to me, at the camp. They treated us according to the Geneva Convention. They fed us, paid us, gave us medical care, treated us as humans." The years unfolded. 1950. Greta Hoffmann, 24 years old, worked as a translator for the United States Army's Civil Affairs Division. One afternoon, she saw a familiar face across a construction site, Walter Kowalski, no longer corporal, just Walter, a civilian engineer. They walked toward each other, met in the middle, shook hands. "You kept it, the dictionary." "Every day, it reminds me that bridges are possible." 1965. Elena Schmidt, 44 years old, stood in front of a classroom at the University of Hamburg, professor of international law. A student raised his hand. "Professor Schmidt, you were a prisoner of war. Why do you advocate for the rights of prisoners? Weren't you angry at your captors?" "I was terrified of my captors. I had been taught they were savages. When I collapsed from an infected wound, bleeding in the mud, I thought I was going to die. But an American doctor saved my life. Captain Thomas Aldrich. He performed surgery, gave me penicillin, blood transfusions, asked my permission before every procedure, treated me according to the Geneva Convention, even though my country had killed his friends. The Americans didn't win the war just because they had better weapons. They won because they had better systems, better logistics, better institutions, and yes, better values. They chose to follow law, even when it was hard. War is when law matters most. Anyone can be civilized in peace. The test is whether you remain civilized when everything is falling apart. The Americans chose to see me as human. That choice saved my life, and maybe it saved Germany's soul. 1985. Margot Werner, 74 years old, trained her last class of nurses at Hamburg General Hospital. She held up a book, Gray's Anatomy, the one Lieutenant Sarah Pemberton had given her 40 years earlier. Worn, annotated in German and English. Medicine knows no borders. A patient is a patient. I learned that from an American doctor in a prisoner of war camp, Lieutenant Pemberton. She treated me with respect when she could have treated me with contempt. She taught me that professional standards matter even when it's hard, especially when it's hard. Carry these standards forward. Be the kind of medical professionals who see patients, not categories. Build something better than what came before. 1986. Eleanor Schmidt was 82 years old. Her granddaughter, Sophia, came to visit. "Omar," Sophia said, "you were a prisoner of war. Did they hurt you?" Elena reached into a drawer in her desk, pulled out a small object wrapped in tissue paper. She unwrapped it carefully. An old bar of ivory soap, 58 years old, never used, preserved. "They didn't hurt me, Liebling," Elena said softly. "They saved me. When I collapsed in the mud, bleeding from an infected wound, I thought I was going to die. I believed the Americans would let me die, or kill me. That's what we'd been taught. But instead, they saved me. Surgery, medicine, blood transfusions. They used their resources on an enemy, because they had rules, the Geneva Convention. And they followed those rules even when it was hard, even when I was the enemy. And that saving hurt in a different way than torture would have, because it destroyed everything I'd been taught to believe." She touched the soap gently. "The Americans didn't break us with cruelty. They broke us with kindness. With a doctor who knelt in mud to save an enemy's life. With a nurse who turned away to give privacy. With a librarian whose son we killed, who still chose to teach. With guards who learned German and gave us chocolate. Once you see your enemy as human, you can never hate the same way again. That's not weakness. That's the hardest strength there is. The strength to let go of certainty, to admit you were wrong, to build something new instead of clinging to something dead." She placed the soap in Sophia's hands. "This soap, I kept it for 58 years, not because it cleaned my body, because it cleaned my mind of lies. It reminds me that mercy is possible, that law can hold even in war. Remember that mercy is always a choice, and that choice defines us more than any victory or defeat ever could." 2006. Eleanor donated the soap to the German Historical Museum in Berlin. It became part of an exhibit called Mercy as Weapon, Objects That Changed Minds. The plaque read, "This bar of ivory soap weighs 3.5 ounces. It was given to German prisoner of war Eleanor Schmidt at Camp Lucky Strike, France, in April 1945. She preserved it for 58 years as a reminder that American soldiers chose to treat enemy prisoners with dignity according to the Geneva Convention. This small object represents a choice that echoed across generations. It taught that seeing enemies as human is not weakness, but the foundation of lasting peace. On opening day, an unexpected visitor arrived. An old man, 91 years old, moving slowly with a cane. He stood in front of the display case for 20 minutes, just staring. A museum guide approached. "Sir, did you know about this exhibit?" "I was there," he said quietly. "Camp Lucky Strike. I was the medic, Patrick Donnelly. I remember her, the German girl bleeding in the mud. I thought she was going to die." He touched the glass separating him from the soap. "I'm glad she didn't." The guide asked if he wanted to leave a comment for the exhibit. Donnelly was quiet for a long moment. Then he spoke. "Tell them this. We didn't save her because we were heroes. We saved her because we had rules, and we followed them, even when it was hard, even when she was the enemy. That's not heroism. That's just civilization. The scary thing is how easy it would have been not to let her bleed out, to look away, to say she's just one German girl who cares. That's the cliff edge. That's how close we always are to becoming the thing we're fighting against. That bar of soap? It's not about kindness. It's about the choice we make every single day, to see humans or to see categories, to follow rules or to follow rage, to be civilized or to be barbarians in uniforms. And that choice is never finished. It's always right there, waiting. He walked away slowly, leaving the guide standing alone in front of a 3.5-ounce bar of soap that had outlasted an empire. Mercy is always a choice. Make it.